Besides that, it is a perfect match to the Textus Receptus.
Besides the differences, it's a perfect match to the Textus Receptus. We are here to take a look at the claims of Dr. Steve Combs from the King James Bible Research Council. And he suggested in a very short clip, it's about a 30-second clip, that P52 is essentially, right, these are my words, essentially, it's essentially the same as the Textus Receptus. Here is Dr. Steve Combs.
Papyrus 52, 100 to 175 AD, has one spelling difference and one place that I consider to be a scribal error.
Okay, so he says one spelling difference and one place that I consider to be a scribal error. Both claims, I think, are problematic, but let's keep going.
Because it was an Omicron, a Greek Omicron, that was misplaced and put in front of a word instead of it behind it. Besides that, it is a perfect match to the Textus Receptus.
So besides that, it is a perfect match to the Textus Receptus. So basically, this is where I kind of get a little bit of a laugh, right? You know, besides the differences, it's a perfect match to the Textus Receptus. Now, I'm in, this is in jest, okay? I don't know Steve Combs personally. I'm sure he's a nice guy. And, you know, if he sees this and wants to come and talk about his stuff, I would be more than glad to have him on and talk about the papyrus in regards to the Textus Receptus. So what's interesting here, okay, is in this instance, right, with the reading that he's talking about here, Dr. Combs and I, we're actually on the same side. We are on the same side. It's just, I think he's doing a little bit of finagling with the evidence here. I don't have anything against him. I really don't. And as you'll see as we discuss this, you'll find that the reading in the Textus Receptus here in Papyrus P52, it's exactly the same as the Byzantine Textform. And so I would be like, all right, let's do it. But this isn't really a test of the Textus Receptus per se, but rather a test of the Byzantine Textform. And if you're going to compare something like a manuscript and say, does it match the TR? You want to pick something that has more than just one potential reading. I want to go back to the video and just point out a couple more things here because, again, it's really interesting.
But you see these papyrus things here, they number papyri, these little pieces of paper. Papyrus 52, 100 to 175 AD, has one spelling difference and one place that I consider to be a scribal error.
Okay, so again, he says one spelling difference. There's actually at least two, maybe three, but at least two. And then he says one place where I consider to be a scribal error. Now I wonder why that is. Do you have a conclusion and you're looking for the evidence, right? I think that's what's going on here. I think because obviously he's a King James Version guy, and you know our biases get in the way, and I'm not ignoring my own biases either. I'm a Byzantine guy, and sometimes that makes me see things in a way that tilts toward my opinion. I get that. We all do that. So again, not to throw shade on Dr. Combs here, but just to say that you know, the way that you view certain things will determine how you look at some of this evidence.
Because it was an Omicron, a Greek Omicron, that was misplaced and put in front of a word instead of it behind it.
Now that's a key phrase, what he's saying there. He's talking about the Greek Omicron here, which he said was placed before the word when it should have been placed after it. Now, he is making some very interesting assumptions here when he says that. The assumption here is that the word following the Omicron is different than what it probably is. And again, we'll go into that in a little bit of detail.
That was misplaced and put in front of a word instead of it behind it. Besides that, it is a perfect match to the Textus Receptus.
Right. Besides that, it is a perfect match to the Textus Receptus. And you know what? Besides that, it is also a perfect match to the Wescot and Hort text, to the Nestle-Aland text, to the ECM, to the Byzantine text. So that statement at the end isn't really helpful. I think he's looking at P52 through the lens of his King James Version only. He can't help but interpret the evidence in a way that works with the Textus Receptus, and he's missing it here. Now let's do this. Let's flip over to the passage in question. So P52 contains John 18:31 to 33ish, and then on the flip side it contains John 18:36, 37, somewhere around there. But we're only going to be concerned with just the one side here. So this is the manuscript here, and as you can see, it's rather fragmentary. And this is kind of the issue with the papyrus. Is that most of the papyrus, and again, I did up that spreadsheet, and I can objectively tell you. Now, I haven't gone and checked, but I could tell you, maybe next time I do a live stream, I could count the number of verses in each manuscript and tell you what the average number of verses is in each papyri. And it's really small. Like there's the main ones. I think there's like P60, P66, P75. And then there's two others, I can never remember what they are, which contain a large chunk of the New Testament, and then the rest are just tiny fragments. So the passage in question is this. It's John 18:31. It says, "Then Pilate said to them, 'You take him and judge him according to your law,'" right? This is the Jews bringing Jesus before Pilate, right, toward the end of Jesus' ministry. And he says, "Therefore the Jews said to him, 'It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death.' That the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what death he would die. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, 'Are you the king of the Jews?'" And that's essentially where our fragment ends there. Are you the king of the Jews? This is the whole tisistin aletheia. What is truth, right? That's actually on the recto, the backside of this papyrus manuscript. The key things in this manuscript that we're going to be really looking at is Pilate. Then Pilate entered. So the words in question are going to be Pilate and again, and you'll see that as we go into it. Let's just make some general observations first on this manuscript, because it is worth noting a couple things. So if I zoom in, one thing that you're going to notice about P52 is that this is clearly not a professional scribe. And the reason why I say it's not a professional scribe is because the letters on them are very inconsistent, right? Just look at the way the alpha is made here. And then look how it's made here, right? And you might say, well, that could be just because the alpha is a little bit faded. If you come over to the next page, I mean, just look, there's 3 alphas in a row, and all 3 of them are different sizes and done in different ways. Like we got a little loop-de-loop here. We kind of have a loop here, but it's not completed. We don't have a loop here. Now you could conclude that, maybe it's just written by a different scribe, but evidently a different scribe is not going to write out an individual line, right? So this is clearly something whipped together quickly. Don't know any story behind it other than it was a fragment that was found. I think it's part of the Nag Hammadi documents pulled out of the sands of Egypt with a whole bunch of other documents. The dating of the manuscript is between 100 and 175. And again, our friend Dr. Steve Combs, he makes reference to that fact. The other thing to notice about this particular fragment is this. And this is actually really important because this makes reconstructing the text much easier, way easier. Notice on the left-hand side that the column is neatly put together, right? The implication here is that this is the left margin. So you have the left margin in there. And so you know where the line starts, where the next line starts. So you can gain a general idea of what's in the lines after it before coming down to the next line. And this is a way in which, this is probably the way in which we're going to be able to know that what Dr. Combs is doing isn't working. Yeah, so there's a couple spelling issues on here. Again, coming back to David. It's David. I keep wanting to call him David. Steve Combs, Dr. Steve Combs. He notes a spelling error, and he's probably talking about the word iselthin, to go into, and typically it's spelled with an epsilon and a iota, but in here, let's see if I can find it. It's spelled with just a iota. I think it's here. Yeah, you can just see the iota and the sigma, just barely. Can I zoom in there? Yeah. So that iota and a sigma, if it was spelled properly, it would be a iota epsilon sigma. Here's my reconstruction. Let me pop my reconstruction up now. This might make a little more sense. Now I had written this out twice. Really, I just wrote it out once and then copy pasted it and then made some modifications to it. I'll share you what those were and why. So again, based on, right, P52 and known variants and stuff, I use this guy right here. So this is the Swanson's four-part gospel series. In it, he provides, right? I'll just show you that. I don't know if, here, let me change that. But trust me, this is really helpful. But the way he lays out the manuscript support for specific readings makes it really easy to track down what manuscript is for what. So when putting together these reconstructions, you can kind of get an idea of what the manuscripts actually say and get a pretty good clue as to what would be in the portion that is Lacanus in the manuscript. Now, again, I have to reiterate, right, that what you're seeing here in the red is a reconstruction based on, other textual variants. And in these cases, they typically either align with the Byzantine Textus Receptus texts, or they align with the critical texts. And what's interesting here is P52, again, coming back to Dr. Steve Combs, he wants to say that this is more, that this supports more Textus Receptus. If you take a look at how the lines end here, this gives us an indication that because the lines are close together, that the reconstruction is generally good, right? It's like you don't have a line way down here and then another line way out here. I mean, they're generally okay. But anyway, so what I did here is I did the second line here and I took out all the spaces, because generally speaking, you're going to see a manuscript, Uncial papyrus manuscript without spaces. And you can see that these lines tend to close in. Now, one thing to keep in mind, you are seeing that this line is a little longer, but there is a bit of debate surrounding whether or not this phrase here, Jesus, whether that should be written out in full or whether that should be nomina sacra, which would be, I think, use with the line over it. And of course, that brings it perfectly in line. Now, again, this isn't perfect, right? Because these letters are computer generated and they are, perfectly spaced, all of the letters, and that's how it works. And when we noted the scribal habits of the, what we could see on the papyrus itself was that the scribe writer was pretty inconsistent with how he was writing his things. So I'm going for the time being that this is close. Now, what we have here is when we compare these texts, right, we look at the Byzantine and the TR text, and you'll see that here. I'll probably make that bigger here. And remember, the claim is that it is essentially the Byzantine text. Now let me make this bigger. Okay, and the stuff that you see highlighted in yellow is represented by the manuscript. Okay, so you got he, they, he, min, luc, existina, pactini, udena, logos to isu, plirothihoni, e pen, simenon, right? You see partial words are in there, but nonetheless, so far so good, right? And again, this was Lacanus, but it's probably right. So basically everything here, aside from one mistake, right? One spelling mistake. Remember the epsilon wasn't there. It was just iota sigma. Everything here matches with the exception of Palin. Again, so the Textus Receptus and the Byzantine text has again. So he went in unto the praetorian again, Pilate did. So Pilate went in unto the praetorian again, and he heard Jesus and said to him, you are the King of the Jews. Okay, so the again, and again, and again, and again, and again. This isn't a very significant textual variant. It's just not, like, if the word again wasn't in there, we wouldn't be losing anything, okay? But P52 does not have Palin in there. It is not extant there. In fact, the passage, the way that the manuscript looks does not allow it to even be there. I will show you. Remember, he circled it right there. Praetorion, right? Praetorion. Ho, and then there's a P here. Now I take this to be Pilatos, right? Pilate. It's common Greek grammar to have an article before a proper name. That's just like there's no other way that it could be really anything else other than Pilatos. However, I want to come back to our friend here and just and see what he says again about P52. Oh, I'm clicking the wrong thing here. Let's just listen. Let's just listen in here.
Papyrus 52, 100 to 175 AD, has one spelling difference and one place that I consider to be a scribal error, because it was an Omicron, a Greek Omicron, that was misplaced and put in front of a word instead of it behind it.
Okay, do you hear that? He says it's a scribal error because it was an Omicron that was placed before the word instead of behind it. So the only thing that I really can take from him in that instance is that what he means is that the pi in the manuscript, let me pull that up here, that this pi, and normally I'd say P, but I say pi because, I don't know, just because when I'm talking in English about Greek alphabet. But he sees the pi there as the word Pauline and not as Pilatos. That's the only way that I can make sense of what Dr. Steve Combs is saying there. That he thinks this is Pauline, and then I'm assuming that what he thinks comes after Pauline would be Pilatos. And so this should read, according to him, because this is a scribal error, Praetorion, Pauline, ho Pilatos. But let's come back to our reconstruction here, right? So the question is what does this do if we change this to make it say what Dr. Combs is saying? Let me see if I can find it here. Here's the here's the Praetorion, ho, and he's saying that this should be Pauline, okay, ho Pilatos. So maybe because it's a scribal error, he didn't put the ho in there. We'll give him that. But what does this do is it shoots that line right out. But here's the other thing that it does. There's only one single manuscript, GA33, a much later manuscript, just one, that doesn't have Pauline again in it at all. And that's right here. So what happens if we take Pauline out of the line above it and put it in the line below it? Well, just look what it does to the lines. It doesn't fit. It cannot fit. You can't fit that in there. Let me just fix those. It doesn't fit. Just plain and simple. It can't fit. Yeah, so what I'm suggesting here is that the pi that he says here is the word Pauline is Pilatos. It's Pilatos. And what actually happens here is with Pauline being up on the line before, and I know, again, this is reconstruction, but if you look at all of the available textual variants, you find out that really the only thing that happens here is Pauline fits above it in the line above it. And so Pauline is there, it's not there. So he is mistaken. The pi listed here, this is not Pauline. You wouldn't typically see an Omicron before Pauline, unless maybe it's like a demonstrative pronoun or something like that, or what do you call it? I forget what you call it, indicating a new clause. There are 0 textual variants that I've been able to find in any of the apparatuses that I've looked at, including Swanson, of all of the papyrus data that he has and everything like that. There are 0 that have a textual variant with Pauline followed by ho in this instance with the Omicron there. It just doesn't work. It's not there. Dr. Steve Combs is literally making this up in order for it to fit into the Textus Receptus. Now, I do need to be fair, right? Because when I was on Nick Sayers, when I was texting with him back and forth on his live stream he did a couple of days ago, the gentleman, I forget what his name was, who put the clip together for the King James Bible Research Council, he said that there were some additional materials that he had. Now, I would love to sit and go through those additional materials, but I didn't get any permission or anything like that to see those or get those. So again, I would be interested to hear his justification for why he has Pauline there. But of all of the sources and all of the details that we know and everything that is extant, this is not Pauline. Now, that was his second claim. Now, so his claim was this. It was one spelling difference and one place where I consider to be a scribal error. because it was an Omicron that was misplaced and put in front of a word instead of behind it. So again, he thinks that the P represents Pauline, and then it would be Ho Pilatos, but there's too many words for the line, and Pauline fits in the line before it. But then he goes on to say, besides that, it is a perfect match to the Textus Receptus. So now, this is where it gets better. It gets better, in my opinion. When he says, besides that, it is a perfect match to the Textus Receptus. Now, I jokingly said at the beginning of the video, besides where it's not, where it doesn't match P52, it actually is a Textus Receptus reading. But Nick on his live stream pulled up the Wescot and Hort text as well, and I pulled up the Wescot and Hort text here. Not only that, but I also cross-checked it with the NA28, and the NA28 and Wescot and Hort are essentially the same. The only difference between the NA Nestle-Aland 28 and the Wescot and Hort text is the spelling of Pilatos, a pilot. We have an epsilon iota instead of just a iota. Okay, now these aren't differences that matter to me. And then the other difference that was in there was, either way, they were inconsequential. For the purposes of our discussion here, they were pretty much the same. So if we compare the Wescot and Hort text of 1881 and Nestle-Aland text, we get basically everything. Everything. It matches. The Wescot and Hort text and the 1881 text, when you don't mistake the pi for Pauline, but you put it in as Pilatos, which it's, I mean, there's no way around that. You can't get around that. You have here in P52 essentially the reading of the Wescot and Hort text and the Nestle-Aland 28. When he says, besides that, it is a perfect match to the Textus Receptus, no, the reality is besides the fact that it's different than the Wescot and Hort text, it's actually the Wescot and Hort text. So, again, I don't see how you can take the pi and make that into Pauline. Where would Pilatos go? Is he suggesting that Pilatos was in the previous line? Because again, you don't have those textual variants in any of the extant material. If you're going to suggest that Pilatos was in the previous line and not in the current line, then you are inventing a textual variant in that little bit of area in which there's a bit of uncertainty. Now, again, let me just be clear, right? I am with Dr. Combs. I want this reading. I want the Byzantine text to be in P52. That would be really cool. But you see, the problem is when you start inventing things and putting in variants that don't exist anywhere else in the manuscript tradition, then you actually undermine your own position. Because what happens is someone like me comes on here and looks at it and then realizes that what was suggested was essentially a pipe dream. It just doesn't exist. And then, of course, when people realize that, well, you just turn people off from thinking, oh, maybe the Textus Receptus is, somewhere early. When those readings, they probably are early. We could go through the evidence and we could find that. This is just not the way to do it, right? But of course, everybody wants P52 on their side because it's the oldest manuscript. It's got shock value, right? But again, we're not part of the oldest is best manuscript club, right? So we don't need to do that.